I didn't find out my aunt had stolen my inheritance all at once. It came to me in fragments, half-finished sentences, pauses that lasted too long, a look exchanged between two adults who didn't realize I was watching. I was 22 when my grandmother died, too young, apparently, to be trusted with the truth, old enough to be excluded from it. We buried her on a cold morning that smelled like wet soil and ironed coats. She had raised me more than my parents ever had. My mother loved me, but she was tired in the way people become when life disappoints them early and never lets up. My father was kind, distant, and always working. My grandmother was the constant, the one who noticed things, the one who remembered. She used to say, "I don't leave money to people who don't listen." At the time, I thought it was one of her dry jokes. I would learn later that it wasn't. After the funeral, we gathered at my aunt's house. It was large, polished, and full of rooms no one was allowed to touch unless guests were present. My aunt moved through it like a hostess in a museum she owned but didn't love. She hugged me tightly when I arrived. "You'll be fine," she whispered, as if I were fragile. That should have been my first warning. The second came when she seated me at the far end of the dining table, away from the conversations that mattered. Plates clinked, wine was poured, voices lowered whenever I leaned in. At one point, I heard my name. "She won't need it right away," my aunt said quietly. Someone murmured agreement. I looked up, confused, but my aunt caught my eye and smiled warmly, the smile people use when they're asking you not to ask questions. I didn't. Not then. The will was handled privately, that's what I was told. "You're young," my aunt explained later. "It's complicated, legal things. You wouldn't want to be overwhelmed." I nodded. I trusted her. She had always been the capable one, the organized one, the one who spoke confidently and never hesitated. Compared to her, I felt small, inexperienced, unsure. So when she told me my grandmother had left me a few personal items and sentimental things, I said thank you. When she handed me a small box with my grandmother's ring, a scarf, and a handwritten recipe card, I cried and hugged her. When she told me everything else was being managed responsibly, I believed her. I was grieving, and grief makes you pliable. Life moved on the way it does when you don't realize something vital has been taken from you. I finished school. I took a job that barely paid rent. I learned how to stretch groceries and pretend exhaustion was normal. I told myself this was just how adulthood felt. Meanwhile, my aunt renovated her kitchen, then her bathroom. Then she bought a vacation home. She said it was smart investing. She was always good with money, my mother said, not quite convincingly. Something didn't sit right with me, but I couldn't name it. Not yet. The moment everything cracked open came 3 years later. It was an accident. I was helping my mother clean out old paperwork when a folder slipped from the shelf. It burst open on the floor, scattering yellowed documents. Among them was a copy of my grandmother's will. Not the full thing. Just enough. I picked it up without thinking. And there it was. My name. Not once. Repeated. Listed clearly. Beneficiary, assets, percentages. My hands started shaking. I sat on the floor, back against the wall, rereading the same lines over and over, as if they might change if I looked away. According to this, my grandmother hadn't left me a trinket. She had left me merely everything. The house, the investment accounts, the business she'd quietly built over decades. I felt sick. My mother stared at the document, then at me. "That can't be right," she whispered. But it was. The signatures were there, the dates, the legal language I didn't fully understand but didn't need to. I was supposed to inherit enough to never struggle the way I had, enough to choose my life instead of surviving it, enough to not feel small. I drove to my aunt's house that night. I didn't call ahead. I didn't rehearse what I would say. I just needed to see her face. She opened the door, surprised, then smiled. "Oh, this is unexpected." "I found the will," I said. The smile faltered, just for a second. Then it returned, tighter. "That old thing?" she said lightly. "There were revisions." "There weren't," I replied. "Not that removed me." She sighed, as if I were being difficult. "You don't understand how these things work." "I understand that my grandmother left me something," I said, "and I never received it." Her eyes hardened. "Your grandmother was confused near the end," she said. "I did what was best." "For who?" I asked. "For the family," she replied. I stared at her. I realized then that she genuinely believed that she thought proximity gave her permission, that responsibility in her mind meant control. "You stole from me," I said quietly. Her jaw tightened. "I protected you," she snapped. "You would have wasted it." That was the moment something in me went cold. I left without another word. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't confront her again, because anger would have been easy and useless. Instead, I did something else. I started asking questions, real ones. Lawyers, records, dates, transfers. Every answer led to another door. Every door revealed more. By the time I understood the full scope of what she'd done, my grief had transformed into something sharper. Focus. She hadn't just taken my inheritance. She'd built her life on it, and she assumed I'd never be strong enough, smart enough, or persistent enough to challenge her. She assumed wrong, but I didn't move immediately. I waited. I learned. I rebuilt myself from the ground up with nothing but discipline and memory. I didn't want what she had. I wanted what was mine, or something better. And when the day finally came that my name appeared somewhere she couldn't ignore, she would realize something far worse than being exposed. She would realize she had underestimated the wrong person. And that realization would come too late. I didn't confront her again after that night, not because I was afraid of her, because I finally understood her. And once you understand someone like my aunt, you stop wasting energy trying to make them admit the truth. People like her don't confess. They justify, they rewrite, they convince themselves so thoroughly that any challenge feels like an attack, not a correction. So I went quiet. Not visibly quiet, not dramatically withdrawn, strategically quiet. On the surface, my life looked the same. Same small apartment, same long hours, same careful budgeting, same polite smiles at family gatherings where my aunt presided like a benevolent ruler, telling stories about how hard things had been after my grandmother's death. She never mentioned my name when she talked about inheritance. I never corrected her. Inside, though, everything shifted. I started with the paperwork. Every document I could legally access, I requested. Property records, business registrations, tax filings. I learned how to read between the lines of legal language, how to spot transfers that didn't quite align with timelines. I stayed up late, highlighting dates, matching signatures, mapping how assets had quietly changed hands. It was overwhelming at first, then it became methodical. I realized something important during those months. My aunt hadn't been reckless. She'd been careful, calculated. She'd taken advantage of my grief, my age, my trust, but she'd done it slowly, in pieces, always justifying each step as temporary or necessary. That made her harder to challenge legally, but easier to outgrow. I spoke to a lawyer once, just once. He listened carefully, nodded slowly, then leaned back in his chair. "You could pursue this," he said. "It would be expensive, emotional, and even if you won, it would take years." "What would you do?" I asked. He studied me. "Honestly, I'd build something of my own, because proving you were wronged won't undo the damage, but success will." That was the moment my path clarified. I wasn't going to chase what she'd stolen. I was going to surpass it. The next phase of my life wasn't glamorous. It was quiet, lonely, and unremarkable to anyone watching from the outside. I worked harder than I ever had before, not because I wanted revenge, because I wanted freedom. I took a second job, then a third. I learned new skills at night when my brain was already exhausted. I said no to invitations, no to weekends, no to rest. I said yes to discomfort, yes to growth that didn't look impressive yet. Sometimes, when I was bone-tired and questioning my own sanity, I thought about my grandmother, about the way she used to watch people without interrupting, about how she believed consistency revealed character faster than confrontation. That thought steadied me. I started small, consulting projects, freelance work, opportunities other people dismissed because they didn't pay immediately. I treated each one like it mattered, because to me, it did. Slowly, people noticed. Not loudly, but enough. A referral here, a recommendation there, a reputation forming that didn't rely on my family name or stolen resources, just my work. My aunt, meanwhile, grew more confident. She upgraded her lifestyle again, hosted larger gatherings, spoke more openly about the legacy she was maintaining. She looked at me with something like pity now, as if I were proof that her decisions had been correct. Once, at a family event, she pulled me aside. "You seem tired," she said. "You don't have to struggle like this, you know." I met her eyes. "I'm not struggling." She smiled indulgently. "Of course you are." That was the last time she ever spoke to me as if she were above me. Because soon after, things began to change. Not dramatically, subtly. I moved into a better place, still modest, but mine. I stopped checking my bank account before buying groceries. I started turning down work because I didn't need it, not because I couldn't get it. My aunt noticed. She didn't say anything at first, but she started asking questions through other people. How is she affording that? What exactly does she do now? Is she getting help from someone? My mother told me later, quietly, with concern in her eyes. "She seems curious," my mother said. I nodded. She should be. The real turning point came when I was invited to speak on a panel. It wasn't a big deal to most people, small industry event, limited audience, but my name was on the program, and that program circulated further than anyone expected. A week later, I got an email from someone I'd never met before. They wanted to invest, not in an idea, in me. I sat in my kitchen staring at the screen, heart pounding, realizing that something had shifted permanently. This wasn't survival anymore. This was trajectory. I didn't tell my family. I didn't update social media. I didn't correct the narrative my aunt continued to tell. I let her believe I was still behind, because when people underestimate you, they give you room, and I was using every inch of it. At the next family gathering, my aunt was unusually attentive. She asked about my work, listened closely to my answers, asked follow-up questions. She was studying me now, trying to understand. "You've changed," she said eventually. "Yes," I replied. "How?" she pressed. I smiled politely. "Time." She nodded slowly, unconvinced. She still thought she was ahead. She still thought the story ended with her winning and me adapting. She had no idea that the foundation she'd stolen from me had forced me to build something stronger, something she would never have access to. And she definitely had no idea that one day soon, my name would appear somewhere she couldn't dismiss, somewhere public, permanent, unavoidable. When that day came, it wouldn't be about money, it would be about visibility, about recognition, about proof. And when she saw it, she wouldn't be able to claim confusion, she wouldn't be able to justify, she wouldn't be able to smile it away. Because for the first time, the truth would be louder than her version of events, and it was getting closer. Success doesn't arrive the way people expect. It doesn't knock politely, it doesn't wait for permission, and it certainly doesn't announce itself to the people who once decided you didn't deserve it. It accumulates, quietly, patiently, almost invisibly. By the time my life began to look different from the outside, it had already changed completely on the inside.
The investment turned into structure. Structure turned into momentum. Momentum turned into credibility. And credibility, real credibility, the kind that doesn't depend on family names or borrowed authority, opened doors I hadn't even known existed. I stopped chasing opportunities. They started finding me. At first, I didn't trust it. I kept waiting for the other shoe to drop, for someone to tell me I didn't belong in the room, that there had been a mistake. That instinct took a long time to unlearn, the reflex of being quietly dismissed. But no one dismissed me. They listened. They asked questions. They deferred. And each time that happened, something inside me recalibrated. I wasn't pretending anymore. I was competent. My aunt still had no idea. That part almost felt surreal. We existed in parallel realities now. Hers built on inherited authority and quiet theft. Mine built on earned influence and relentless work. We still attended the same holidays, sat at the same tables, exchanged polite conversation. But we were no longer occupying the same world. I could feel it in the way she watched me now. Less patronizing, more cautious. She asked about my projects with too much interest, complimented me in public while probing for details in private. "How did you manage that?" she'd ask casually. "I worked," I'd reply. She didn't like that answer, because work implied fairness, and fairness threatened the story she'd told herself for years, that she had taken what was necessary because she was more capable. If I was capable too, then what had she really done? The first major milestone came quietly. A publication reached out for an interview. Not a local one, not niche, national. They wanted to profile emerging leaders in my field, people building something new, something disruptive. My name had been submitted by more than one source. When I read the email, I didn't celebrate. I closed my laptop and sat on the floor, because suddenly I understood the scale of what was happening. This wasn't a win I could hide. This wasn't something my aunt could explain away as a fluke. This was visibility. I almost said no. Old instincts whispered that exposure was dangerous, that being seen invited scrutiny, that attention had consequences. But then I thought of my grandmother, of her quiet certainty, of the way she'd built her own success without asking permission, without shrinking to make others comfortable. I said yes. The interview was conducted over video. Calm, professional, thorough. They asked about my background, my approach, my philosophy. They didn't ask about my family. They didn't ask about money. They asked about decisions, mistakes, resilience. When the article went live, it didn't explode. It didn't need to. It circulated steadily, thoughtfully, the kind of piece people saved and forwarded instead of skimming and forgetting. My name appeared in clean print. No footnotes, no disclaimers, just my name. That's how my aunt found out. She called me the next morning. Her voice was light, but there was tension under it. "I saw something interesting today." "I imagine you did," I replied. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked. I paused. "Tell you what?" "That you were doing so well," she said. I smiled to myself. "You never asked." She laughed softly. "Of course I did." "No," I said gently. "You assumed." Silence stretched between us. "Well," she said finally, "I'm proud of you." The words felt strange coming from her. "Thank you," I replied. She hesitated. "You know, your grandmother would have been happy." That did it. Not anger, not pain, clarity. "She was," I said calmly. "She always believed in me." Another pause. "Did she?" my aunt asked, a little too quickly. "Yes," I replied. "She proved it." The call ended soon after. My mother cried when she read the article. Not loudly, quietly, the way people cry when relief finally outweighs worry.
"I wish she were here to see this," she said. "She is, in her way." The next few months accelerated. More coverage, more invitations, panels, advisory roles, partnerships that didn't feel predatory or dismissive. For the first time in my life, I was being evaluated on what I could contribute, not what I came from. My aunt's demeanor changed again. She became distant, guarded. She stopped offering unsolicited advice, stopped positioning herself as the authority when I was present. Sometimes I caught her watching me with something close to fear. I knew why. Because success reframes the past, and my success was beginning to illuminate hers. People started asking questions, not directly, casually. "Didn't your mother leave most of her estate to her granddaughter?" "I thought so. I could have sworn." My aunt laughed those conversations off, but laughter has a shelf life, and hers was expiring. The second publication came without warning. Larger than the first, a deeper profile. They weren't interested in my rise. They wanted to understand my method, my thinking, my decision-making process. They didn't frame me as a survivor. They framed me as a strategist. When the article went live, my phone didn't stop vibrating for hours. Messages from people I hadn't heard from in years, from colleagues, from distant relatives who suddenly remembered my name, and from my aunt. She didn't call this time. She texted, "We need to talk." I stared at the screen for a long moment before replying. About what? 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. "About the past," she wrote. I didn't answer, because the past had already started speaking for itself. A week later, an acquaintance forwarded me something without comment. It was a discussion thread, private. Industry professionals dissecting leadership trajectories, predicting future influence. My name was there. So was hers. The contrast was stark. People spoke about my work with curiosity and respect. They spoke about her involvement with skepticism. Questions surfaced about how she'd come into certain positions, how assets had shifted so cleanly, so quickly after my grandmother's death. No accusations, just doubt. Doubt is dangerous, especially for people who've built their identity on being unquestioned. That night, my mother called. "I think something is wrong," she said quietly. "With what?" I asked. "With your aunt," she replied. "She seems afraid." I closed my eyes. "She made choices," I said gently. "Now she's living with them." "She wants to explain," my mother said. "I'm not her judge," I replied. "I don't need an explanation." But explanations have a way of demanding space. The first crack in her carefully managed world came from an unexpected place, an audit. Routine on paper, but audits rarely feel routine to people who've spent years justifying shortcuts. I didn't know the details. Daniel and I had learned the value of not entangling ourselves unnecessarily, but I heard enough. Accounts frozen temporarily, requests for documentation, delays. The kind of things that make confident people restless. She showed up at my door unannounced one evening. I opened it and found her standing there, impeccably dressed, eyes sharp, hands clenched just enough to betray tension. "You knew," she said without greeting. "Knew what?" I asked calmly. "That this would happen," she snapped. "I didn't cause it, if that's what you mean." She stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, looking around my apartment. It wasn't extravagant, but it was intentional, thoughtful, mine. "You think this makes you better than me," she said bitterly. "No," I replied. "I think this makes me free." She laughed, but it sounded brittle. "You wouldn't be here without what she left." I met her gaze steadily. "Neither would you." Her face tightened. "You could help," she said suddenly. I raised an eyebrow. "Help with what?" "Clarifying things," she said. "Publicly. You have influence now." I shook my head slowly. "I won't lie for you," I said, "and I won't fight you either." Her voice dropped. "Then what do you want?" I didn't answer right away. "I want you to sit with the truth," I said finally, "the same way I had to." She stared at me, searching for something. Anger, perhaps, or guilt. She found neither. I walked her to the door. She stopped before leaving. "You think you've won," she said. "I think the game you were playing doesn't matter anymore," I replied. She left without another word. Days later, the announcement came. The list. The one people whispered about, speculated over, dreamed of. My name appeared on it. Cleanly, undeniably. Forbes. Not a headline, not a stunt, a recognition. Years of work distilled into a line of print that would outlive rumors, justifications, and carefully curated stories. I didn't celebrate loudly. I sat alone for a long time, because the first person I thought of wasn't my aunt, it was my grandmother. The woman who'd seen me when I was invisible, who'd trusted me when others decided I was too young, too quiet, too untested. My aunt saw it online, of course she did. I didn't hear from her immediately, but I heard about her, the way she'd gone quiet, withdrawn, how her confidence had fractured under the weight of scrutiny she could no longer control. The list didn't accuse her. It didn't need to. It simply told a different story, one where I had built something undeniable, one where her narrative no longer fit. And when people compared timelines, legacies, outcomes, the contrast spoke louder than any confrontation ever could. The truth was no longer something I carried alone. It was public, and it was irreversible. All that remained now was the reckoning. Not legal, not dramatic, personal, and it was coming. The reckoning didn't arrive with sirens or subpoenas. It arrived with silence. The kind that follows when a story people have relied on for years suddenly stops making sense. After my name appeared on that list, the world didn't change overnight, but the way people looked at the past did. Conversations shifted. Old assumptions were revisited. Quiet questions replaced confident statements. My aunt stopped hosting gatherings. At first, she claimed she was busy, then tired, then unavailable. Eventually, she stopped explaining it all. I heard about her through fragments, through my mother's careful updates, through relatives who didn't quite know how to phrase what they were asking. She's been under a lot of stress. She's dealing with some things. She says people are misunderstanding her. I listened without comment, because I knew something they didn't yet understand. Misunderstanding wasn't her problem. Exposure was. Not exposure in the dramatic sense, no headlines accusing her of theft, no public takedown, just the slow erosion of authority that happens when credibility dries up. People stopped deferring to her, stopped taking her word as final, stopped assuming she knew best. And for someone like my aunt, that was devastating. We ran into each other one last time by accident, at a charity event my mother had insisted I attend. Neutral ground, public, safe. She saw me first. I could tell by the way her posture stiffened, the way her smile flickered on and off like a failing light. We exchanged pleasantries, nothing sharp, nothing dramatic, just two women standing on opposite sides of a truth that could no longer be negotiated. "You've done very well for yourself," she said. "Yes," I replied. There was a pause. "I suppose you think this proves something," she said. I considered her carefully. "No," I said, "it reflects something." She frowned. "What's the difference?" "Proof requires an audience," I said. "Reflection just tells the truth." Her lips pressed together. For the first time, she looked tired. Not angry, not defensive, just diminished. "I did what I thought was right," she said quietly. "I know. That's why this ended the way it did." She searched my face. "I didn't mean to hurt you," she said. I believed her. That was the tragedy of it. "You didn't need to mean it," I said gently. "You just needed to benefit from it." We stood there in silence.
Then she nodded once, as if accepting something she could no longer change, and walked away. That was it. No apology, no confession, and none was required, because the truth had already done its work. In the months that followed, my life continued expanding in ways that felt almost surreal when I allowed myself to pause and take stock. Not extravagantly, intentionally. I invested carefully, built slowly, created space for rest without guilt, for joy without justification. I hired people who reminded me of myself at 22, capable, overlooked, underestimated. I listened to them. I trusted them. I made sure no one ever had to beg to be seen the way I once had. My mother visited often. She never asked about my aunt anymore. Instead, she asked about my plans, my ideas, my thoughts. She listened now. One evening, she said something that stayed with me. "I think your grandmother knew," she said, "not just about the money, about who you'd become." I smiled. I think she did too. The inheritance my aunt stole never came back to me. Not legally, not financially, and oddly enough, that stopped mattering, because what I built exceeded it in every way that counted. I built credibility without shortcuts, influence without manipulation, security without taking from anyone who trusted me, and I built it in full view of the world. My aunt lost more than money in the end. She lost the story she told herself about being the most capable person in the room. She lost the authority she'd borrowed from proximity. She lost the illusion that control equals worth. And she lost it not because I took anything from her, but because I refused to carry her lie anymore. People sometimes ask me now if I regret not fighting harder for what was taken. I always answer the same way. No, because fighting her would have kept me tied to her. Outgrowing her set me free. The truth is, my name appearing on that list wasn't the victory. It was the punctuation, the quiet period at the end of a sentence that had been forming since the day my grandmother trusted me with her belief. The real inheritance wasn't money. It was clarity. It was resilience. It was the understanding that power taken in secret always collapses under light, and that the most devastating response to betrayal isn't revenge, it's becoming undeniable. My aunt learned that lesson too late, but I learned it just in time, and I've been living its rewards ever since.